Hibernate is a very popular Java programming tool that lets you access and manipulate tabular data stored in relational databases. In this brief video tutorial, I will show you how to quickly and easily get started using Hibernate. All of the software that I'm using in this video is free and available on the internet. Apache Derby is the relational database, and Eclipse is the integrated development environment that I will be using. Hibernate will work with various database servers. It will work with the Microsoft SQL Server. It will work with Oracle MySQL. In this particular example, I'm using Apache Derby. You can download Apache Derby off of the Apache website. Go to the download section, pick the version that you want, and just download it. It's free. Once it's downloaded, you can start up the database server by going to the bin folder and double clicking on the start network server batch file. And here we go. That starts up the database server. The IDE that I'm using is Eclipse. As you can see, I've installed a dark theme in my Eclipse. I've also installed the Hibernate tools, which is a subsection of the JBoss tools. When you install the Hibernate tools, you get the Hibernate perspective. This green button in the top right corner is the regular Java perspective. Then the button next to it is the Hibernate perspective. And I've also installed the database development perspective. Okay, the next thing that we're going to want to do is create a new database for a project. In the database development perspective, let's right click on the database connections folder, select new, select Derby, type in Person, click next. Here in the setup screen, the first thing that you're going to want to do is set up a JDBC client driver. I've already done that, but the way you do it is you click on the new driver definition button, select Derby client JDBC driver, and add the jar file for the driver. It's called derbyclient.jar. This file is located in the Derby installation folder. There's a subfolder called lib for library. You open that, and that's where all the drivers are. The derbyclient.jar driver file is the second one from the top. Okay, so once you've done that, you're gonna want to set up the path for your new database. Let's put this one on the C drive, folder Java / let's call it Person. I'm not on the network, so the host is just localhost. If you recall, when we started up the database server, the default database server port was 1527. That's the port that we're gonna specify here in the setup. Username, put in user, password TEST. This database does not exist yet, so we want to create it, create database, and we want to save the password. And click next and click finish. And there we have it. We've created a new database. Now let's populate our new database with some data. Let's right click on the connection and select Open SQL Scrapbook. Here we're gonna want to select our new database. And then I'm not very good at SQL, so I'm gonna cheat here. I'm just gonna copy and paste some code that I've already prepared. First, we're going to create a new authorization schema, call it my schema. Then we're going to create a table named person. That table is going to have 3 fields. The first field is going to be auto-generated. This is how you specify an auto-generated field in Derby. The second field will be a text string of 50 characters for the person's name. And the third field is going to be a text string of 50 characters for the person's address. Then when we create that table, we'll insert some data. We're going to insert actually 3 records into that table. So you can see here into the table person, we're going to insert records with fields person name and person address. The ID field will be auto-generated, so we don't need to enter it. And the person's name will be Manny, Mo, and Jack, and they will live on Washington Boulevard, Jefferson Boulevard, and Lincoln Boulevard, respectively. So let's execute this statement. Right click and then select execute all. And there we have it. Now we've input some data into our database. We can take a look at the structure of our new database to verify that our SQL script has executed correctly. In the schemas subfolder, we can see that we've generated a new schema called my schema. There's a new table called person, and that table has 3 columns: ID, person name, and person address. Let's see some sample data. Okay, Jefferson, Lincoln, Washington for the person's address. Person's name, sample contents, Jack, Manny, and Mo. Okay, so that all looks good. Let's close that up. Turn off the SQL scrapbook. Don't save. Clear the screens. And now we can move on to creating our Java project. We can now switch over to the regular Java perspective. With Hibernate, I find it easier to reference the necessary dependencies in Maven rather than to include all of the required jar files in the build path. So that is the reason the type of the new project that I'm going to create will be a Maven project. Next, let's make it a quick start project. And here it's a good practice to use the model view controller pattern in your applications, but for simplicity purposes here I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to create one package and I'll call it application. The artifact ID, let's call it Hibernate person, and click finish. And there's our new Maven application. Now this Maven application by default includes some dependencies and some structure to facilitate testing, but I don't know how to use JUnit yet, and I want to keep this project as simple as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete all of those testing classes and all of the testing folders. Okay, and now we're left with the bare bones Maven application. Now let's add the Hibernate dependencies to the POM file. Let's open the POM file, switch to the source view, and you can see here that among the reference dependencies we've got the dependencies for JUnit testing. We don't want that, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete that dependency. And then I've already googled the dependencies for Hibernate core. Here it is for the Hibernate core library. Going to include that, and I'm also going to include the Maven dependency for the Derby client. Those are the two dependencies that we want referenced in our POM file. Okay, let's fix the indentation here, and that looks good. Control S to save it. Up. Guess I need to delete and close. Now that we've got the Maven dependencies out of the way, let's switch over to the Hibernate perspective and let's generate the XML config file. It's new Hibernate configuration file, cfg.xml. Select the Hibernate person parent folder. We could set up all of the properties of the config file here in these fields that are listed here in the configuration screen, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to cheat. I prefer to use the source view of the generated XML file. Then I'm going to just select and erase the code that's been auto-generated, and on top of that I'm gonna paste the setup that I've already prepared in advance. So here we've got all of the parameters that we've used earlier to create our database. One new property is the dialect. You can see that here we're using the Derby 10.7 dialect, which is currently the latest Derby dialect. Everything else is self-explanatory. So let's save this, Control S, and close it. Using this new configuration file that we've just created, let's generate a Hibernate configuration. Switch over to the Hibernate configurations tab, right click and select Add Configuration. Here we can name it something more meaningful. Let's say Hibernate Person config. Project, we're going to select this project. Hibernate connection is to the person database. The configuration file is, let's use an existing one, the one that we just generated earlier, hibernate.cfg.xml. Apply that. Options, we can select the Derby dialect. Let's apply that as well. And that's it. Now we have our new Hibernate configuration. If we take a look at the database, we'll see the schema, the person, table, and all of the fields or columns that exist in this table. Now that we've got the configuration set up, let's go back to our application structure. If you get an error message while setting up the Hibernate configuration, it could be that the database server has stopped running. Make sure that the database server is running and try again. Now let's generate the Reverse Engineering XML file. Here it is, Hibernate Reverse Engineering file. Select where we want to put it. We want it to go into the application Hibernate person folder. Next, let's select the configuration that we've just created earlier. Refresh the schema. Let's stretch this a little bit. Here's the schema in our database, my schema, and here's the person table. We could include into our reverse engineering setup each field individually, but I want to reverse engineer this whole table, so let's select the entire table, person, include, and finish. And there we go. There's our reverse engineering XML file. Now that we've selected which database table we wish to reverse engineer into a new Java class, let's go ahead and set up the code generation configuration. And here we can name it. This name looks okay. Console configuration, we're gonna select the Hibernate configuration that we've set up earlier. Output directory, we only have one package in this application, and that's where we want this this new Java class to be saved to. The package, you don't want to create any new packages here. That's why we're not going to specify anything here. Reverse engineer.xml, we're going to select the file that we've just created earlier. And in the exporters tab, we're going to select the Java domain code, and we're going to use annotations. Select use Java 5 syntax and select generate Java beans annotations. Alternatively, we could create XML mappings, but I prefer to use annotations. Once we've done all that, click apply and then run, and this will create a new Java class based on the mapping that we've specified. And here it is, Person.java. It's a Java class based on the person table in our database. Let's see, add package declaration. Okay, let's add the package declaration. Let's see, a serializable class needs to have a version ID identifier, so let's add a default version identifier, and that's it. Let's save this class and let's close it. Connection with the database is facilitated using the session objects. Session objects are instantiated in a session factory. I'm going to use boilerplate code to generate a new Java class, and I'm going to call this class Hibernate Utilities, that I'm going to use to instantiate session objects. So let's name this new class Hibernate Utils. It's going to be a public class, and let's create it. Okay, here it is. And as I said, I'm going to delete this auto-generated code, and I'm going to paste the boilerplate code that I got off the internet. So you can see what's going on here. Basically, there's a method that creates a session factory, builds a session factory. Then from this session factory we get metadata, and based on this metadata we can create sessions. So that's basically what it does. Save it. We need to make a small adjustment to the config.xml file to let Hibernate know which class to use for mapping. And this is how we do it. We specify the Hibernate application.hibernate person class as the mapping class. We save the configuration file, close it, and then earlier on I've made a mistake saving the config.xml file. I've saved it to the root directory, to the root folder of the Hibernate person project. I should have saved it to the source main Java folder. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to move it to the source main Java folder. Okay, we get some error message, but I can see that the file has been moved, or rather copied, to the source main Java folder, so we should be okay there. Because of this error that I've made earlier, I'm just going to rebuild the Hibernate configuration just as a precaution. So right click, rebuild configuration, and that's it. Back to the package explorer. As the last order of business, I'm going to modify the main method of the application class that was created by default by Maven. So let's delete that class and create a new one, call it app public. Okay. And rather than retype the code into this new class, I'm just going to paste it, and then I'll walk you through it. Control S to save it, run it. Let's see first if it works. And there we are. We get our output in the console window. Manny lives on Washington Boulevard. Record number 2, Mo, lives on Jefferson Boulevard. And record number 3, Jack, lives on Lincoln Boulevard. Okay, let's take a look at the main method. The execution of the application starts here. We generate a session factory. Then we use that session factory to instantiate sessions. Sessions are used to start transactions, and then we use the Hibernate query language, which is similar to SQL. The difference is that SQL queries data from, or manipulates data manipulates fields in tables. Hibernate query language queries data from the members in class objects. So it's an object-oriented version of SQL. What we do here is we create a query using the Hibernate query language, and then all the data that was queried from the person class we store in a list of person objects. Then in a for loop we parse this list and we output the data from this list, the ID number, the person's name, and the person's address for all of the persons that are stored in this list, to the standard output, to the console window. And then we commit this transaction, meaning we execute it. So let's run it one more time just to see what the output looks like. And here it is. Okay, well, that was my brief tutorial on how to get started with Hibernate. Thank you for watching it, and I hope you found it useful.